Iran is undergoing a truly historic process. Every street in the country is celebrating the collapse of a 46-year-old oppressive regime. There is unprecedented enthusiasm. The landscape of fear and iron fist that has lasted for half a century is now changing. The source of this change is neither police sirens nor popular protests. We hear the cries of joy from millions celebrating their freedom. From Isfahan to Karaj, from Tehran's most conservative neighborhoods to the wealthy districts in the north, the same voices are heard. Everyone is declaring the regime's actual collapse by waving pre-revolutionary flags. The "Long Live the Shah" slogans are preparing the country for a completely different regime. The trigger behind the festive atmosphere in the streets occurred on February 28th. This date did not just redraw the geopolitical map of the Middle East. A total of 200 war jets took off from Israel and successfully hit nearly 500 strategic military targets without a single loss. Russia's S-300 and Tor systems, Iran's national systems Bavar and Arman, were blinded. But the damage caused by this attack is only the tip of the iceberg. The real critical point is that the people took to the streets without any restraining factors and chanted slogans in support of the Shah. This is because the US and Israel directly eliminated Khamenei. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu appeared before the world public. Both leaders stated that this simultaneous operation directly targeted the nerve center of the regime, namely Ali Khamenei's residence. The Beit Rabari complex, where the 86-year-old leader was located, was hit with high-precision bunker-busting munitions. This created a huge shockwave at the top of the regime. Within hours, Trump's clear statement from the White House that Khamenei is dead changed everything in Iran. Netanyahu's words that there were many signs that Khamenei was no longer among us further shook the Tehran regime. Satellite images and data leaked from NASA's firm's thermal imaging systems confirmed these statements. There were massive black smoke columns and charred building complexes at the coordinates where the leadership house was located. Finally, the announcement expected from Iran came in the early hours of March 1st. Iranian state television confirmed the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. A 40-day period of official mourning was declared. It was reported that the religious leader was in his office during the attack.
Grand Ayatollah Imam Khomeini. Grand Ayatollah Imam Khamenei. We send our salutations.
The first detail to emerge was that the regime would not be able to regain its former power after this massive loss. This situation reminds us of the critical point of the popular uprising between December and January. Namely, the way was paved for a new leader in Tehran to replace Khamenei. As protests continued in the streets of Iran, the people were saying one thing: "Long live the Shah." When the top echelons of the state collapsed, the name expected to fill that void reappeared. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, who had been in exile since 1979. For Iranians, this was a fateful moment. The exiled crown prince addressed the security forces directly, inviting them to abandon the regime and stand with the people. Pahlavi said, "Now that the Islamic Republic is collapsing, my message to the country's military, law enforcement, and security forces is clear. Join the nation and help ensure a stable and secure transition." This strategic call was a new turning point for the Iranian people. These words deepened the historic rift between the regular army and the Revolutionary Guards and paved the way for the army to turn its guns on the regime. Pahlavi's statement that the bloodthirsty death spot of our age has been erased from the pages of history had an even more striking effect. This was the official announcement of the moment of victory that supporters of the monarchy had been waiting for years. The Shah in exile positioned himself as the natural and legitimate leader of the transitional government that would be formed. Pahlavi also directly thanked Donald Trump, and he demanded the utmost caution from the U.S. to prevent harm to the people. This situation also strengthened Pahlavi's legitimacy as the new face of Iran in the international diplomatic arena. The public's response to these historic calls was quite clear. The slogans "Pahlavi" and "Long Live the Shah," which spread rapidly through the streets of Tehran, showed that the prince's messages had particularly resonated with the younger population. And these slogans proved to have a serious impact on the masses who wanted change. Demonstrators in the streets of Tehran showed their determination via Starlink connections and VPN networks despite internet blackouts. People are showing the world their determination to see this revolution through to the end. In fact, everything seemed to be in place for Pahlavi's arrival. The reality on the ground left the Iranian people, whose economy had collapsed, whose rial had become worthless, and who had been starved for years with no other choice. Either the Shah would come, or Iran would continue on with the remnants of the collapsing regime. Of course, during this revolutionary process, different groups besides the Shah were also charting their own course. Maryam Rajavi, leader of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, called for a democratic republic opposing the monarchy. This was the first sign of the ideological competition that could unfold on the opposition front. In other words, a rival was emerging for Shah Reza Pahlavi. Rajavi's statement, "We reject both the Shah and the mullahs," further fueled the competition. Meanwhile, what was the remaining administration in Tehran doing after the attack? Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Baghaei painted a picture of helplessness, saying, "I am in no position to confirm anything." This clearly documented how the state apparatus was paralyzed at the highest level. These confessional words indicate that there is truly nothing tangible left of the Tehran regime. In fact, this description is not wrong because the US and Israel targeted not only Khamenei, the regime's top figure, but also his supporters. Iran's political, military, and intelligence backbone was broken in just 24 hours. The list of deaths shared by the Israel Defense Forces revealed everything. You will be shocked when you hear the names on the list. Mohammad Pakpour, commander of the Revolutionary Guard Ground Forces. Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh Ali Shamkhani, Khamenei's close advisor. Nearly 40 high-ranking officials and commanders are mentioned. It is claimed that the regime's most crucial figures were simultaneously neutralized. These massive losses in the command structure instantly paralyzed the regime's ability to operate on the ground. Security advisor, head of the military office, and head of air defense intelligence. The presence of all these strategic minds on the same list effectively collapsed Iran's command and control mechanism. Let's pause here and imagine what could happen in the wake of this leadership vacuum. The first possibility is the partial continuity of the weak regime left behind by Khamenei, but with a sharp shift to the right. Within this possibility, a power struggle could begin among IRGC factions. This could lead to months of internal strife. It could destabilize energy markets and it could trigger protests. Furthermore, public reactions such as celebrations in cities like Tehran and Isfahan could fuel this struggle. This situation would force the regime into greater repression. The IRGC may seek to seize complete control. A less religious, more military-dominated authority could be established. Strong indications have already emerged that this possibility is not impossible within the new regime that will be established. The U.S. intelligence community has suggested that the IRGC cannot hold the country together without its leadership. This suggests that the new regime in Iran will have a military structure. However, in this scenario, Iran closes itself off, seeks economic agreements against sanctions, and weakens its proxy forces. But the risk of civil war increases in the long term. A more optimistic scenario is that the popular uprising completely collapses the regime. Celebrations following Khamenei's death could turn into organized opposition, with calls from figures like Reza Pahlavi, prompting security forces to switch sides. This scenario, encouraged by U.S. immunity offers, could lead to a democratic transition. However, due to the lack of an organized alternative, chaos is likely to persist within the country. The worst-case scenario is complete state collapse and the continuation of uncertainty. Ethnic and regional divisions could erupt at this very point. Iran could become vulnerable to intervention by neighboring countries. This could signal a much longer war in the Middle East. Factors such as the reconstruction of nuclear facilities will bring international intervention much more to the fore. At this point, it is unclear which possibility will materialize. But in any scenario, economic collapse, regional tension, and internal turmoil seem inevitable. So, can the remnants of the regime determine the new leader? That is a new name. At this point, names such as Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei or Hassan Khomeini, come to the fore. According to Iran's constitution, the Supreme Leader successor is elected by the 88-member Assembly of Experts. This process is based on religious qualifications, political loyalty, and the continuity of the regime. With Khamenei's death, names such as his son Mojtaba Khamenei and Khomeini's grandson Hassan Khomeini will be evaluated, according to this law. However, the realistic chances of these candidates are limited by the regime's internal dynamics, public reactions, and international pressures. Let's take a closer look at the first successor. Mojtaba Khamenei, born in 1969, is his father's second son and is known as one of Iran's secret power centers. He completed his religious education in Qom, but has no official title. Instead, he plays an influential role in the Supreme Leader's office. He oversees intelligence operations. He influences IRGC appointments and manages his father's inner circle. Mojtaba Khamenei is a hardline conservative who reflects his father's views. He is a figure who supports anti-Western policies and the axis of resistance. He has long been speculated to be a successor candidate. This is because it is known that Mojtaba played an active role in decision-making processes during Khamenei's health issues. Some reports and ex-posts claim that Mojtaba has already been announced as the new leader, for example, as highlighted by Iranian media. He may be supported by the regime's militarist wing. This is because Mojtaba is seen as someone who will continue his father's legacy. A time of war could create a need for transition and influence the assembly of experts in Mojtaba's favor. No official statement has been made yet. Mojtaba's biggest challenge is the country's perception of monarchy. The revolution was anti-monarchy and rejected family legacy. Therefore, his election could cause public anger. Now let's look at the other candidate, Hassan Khomeini. Born in 1972, he is the grandson of the revolution's founder and holds the title of Ayatollah. He is reformist-minded, supporting women's rights, economic liberalization, and dialogue with the West. Though his past candidacy was rejected, his legitimacy remains high due to his Khomeini lineage. He represents the pure legacy of the revolution. This comparison highlights the deep ideological divide. Popular celebrations and a wave of opposition could open the door to a reformist leader. Hassan Khomeini has supporters in the Assembly of Experts and could be a figure of compromise in the post-war transition. However, this successor to Khamenei also faces some obstacles. He is marginalized as moderate by hardline conservatives. The IRGC and the judiciary see him as a threat. He faces criticism for diluting his grandfather's legacy. His chances would increase if the regime's military wing were to change completely, but they are low under the current structure. Both candidates have a chance. If Mojtaba is elected, the regime will harden. If Hassan is elected, reforms may come. However, uncertainty prevails. The other candidates are Judiciary Chief Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei and former Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani. The situation after the attack and the protests will likely affect this new regime process. However, Iran has secondary actors who are in too difficult a situation to wait for the regime to change. That is proxy powers. Tehran is now completely leaderless. So will those close to the regime listen to it without an effective leader? Although he was known to be ruthless, Khamenei had enormous influence within the Tehran regime. Everyone listened to him, and even if they didn't agree, they didn't take any countermeasures. But with his removal, Iran's proxy elements are now also leaderless. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Shiite militia groups have fallen into a major strategic vacuum, with the overnight disappearance of their command centers and financial resources in Tehran. The paralysis of the IRGC, the protective umbrella of these proxy forces, means the breaking of the siege pressure Israel has felt on its borders for years. The paralysis of the IRGC, the protective umbrella of these proxy forces, means the breaking of the siege pressure Israel has felt on its borders for years. Of course, neither Israel nor the US should become completely complacent in the region. Experts and military analysts are warning because the retaliations that occurred just a few hours after the attacks have created enormous dangers in the region. What will happen in the continuation of this process is hidden in Iran's response to the joint US-Israeli attacks, because this collapsing structure found no other solution than to attack its surroundings in desperation. The Tehran regime targeted 8 different countries following the US and Israeli attacks. Iran's limited ballistic retaliations hit some early warning radars and bases at US bases in the Middle East. This was seen as an attempt by the regime to pose a regional threat even as it was dying. However, the absence of central authority turned these moves into a desperate reflex rather than a strategic victory. Nevertheless, the attacks on the Al Udeid base in Qatar caused hearts to skip a beat. Following these attacks, U.S. Central Command raised the alert level in the region to its highest level. This already signaled that Iran's remaining military capabilities would be systematically destroyed. The most notable retaliatory step was the missile and drone attacks on the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. Hours after the attacks that killed Khamenei, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and kamikaze drones such as the Shahed 136 targeted the Fifth Fleet. The Fleet Service Center was hit, and emergency response teams were deployed. High-rise residential buildings were also affected by the drone attacks. The Bahraini government declared the attacks a violation of sovereignty. Simultaneously, attacks targeted U.S. bases in the UAE, Kuwait, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, with explosions reported in these areas. Threats also persist from the collapsing Iranian regime in international waters, including claims of closing the Strait of Hormuz. These claims cause temporary global oil market fluctuations, though U.S. naval power and B-2 patrols prevent long-term threats. We must also mention Israel's actions to neutralize emerging threats from the regime as it loses power. Israel's Arrow 3 anti-ballistic system has achieved outstanding success, particularly outside the atmosphere. The system is capable of destroying ballistic missiles in space, effectively neutralizing threats before they reach their targets. These moments showed that Iran's remaining ballistic missiles largely neutralized the threat to mainland Israel. However, the danger persists. Missile alerts are constant in Israeli airspace, with Iran targeting Tel Aviv. The evacuations at Ben Gurion Airport reflected the war's psychological impact on civilians. This situation doesn't change the fact that the military balance has shifted in Israel's favor. The impact of these retaliatory attacks is perhaps not even 1/10 of what is happening in the Tehran regime. International repercussions are also surfacing. Global reactions are initiating a major diplomatic chess game in the new Middle East order. Notably, the Russian Foreign Ministry merely condemned the attack without offering practical support. This is interpreted as the clearest indication of Moscow's weakened power in the Ukrainian quagmire and its lack of capacity to defend Iran. However, there is no need to be surprised by this situation. Putin did not even lift a finger after Maduro's capture. Khamenei was probably just another name that the Russian leader could forget, just like Maduro. China's standard diplomatic statements calling on the parties to exercise restraint reflected Beijing's concern to protect its massive energy investments in the region. This stance documents Beijing's avoidance of direct conflict, Turkey's emphasis on preserving stability in the region, and Saudi Arabia's cautious silence should also not be forgotten. Both approaches reveal that regional powers are carefully monitoring Iran's collapse in line with their own national security strategies. Stay with PPR Global in pursuit of the truth. Thank you for choosing us.